Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Cherie Best. You are listening to the Just Love Them podcast. Join me on a journey to understand and find peace with those we love who have left the faith. Today with me, I have Laura Jacobs. Laura is a friend of mine. We've been friends for probably 5 or 6 years, I'm going to guess, maybe 7. Laura and I had a conversation that started at her house. We were at my husband's book signing, as a matter of fact, at her house. She so generously had offered. She asked me, we were just kind of catching up, and she asked me like what I was doing in my life. And at the time, so this was like in November, at the time I was getting ready to launch this podcast. I had not even yet launched it. As we started talking, Laura just had so many wonderful things to say. And I just felt so prompted, like, that you needed to be on here, Laura, when I did start it, which was clear back in January. So this is the right timing. And Laura, I'm just going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself for a minute.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that warm welcome. It's been so fun to know each other. You have me doing the math in my head. I think it was actually fall of 2018. Now that I kind of put it all together was when we met. So
Yeah.
how wonderful that we've already passed our 5-year mark. So that's great.
Love it.
I just love you and your husband and just all that you bring. You're both such a bright light. So thank you for being that in my life.
Thank you.
And a little bit about me, the easy stuff is been married for almost 37 years to my sweetheart, Jerry. The proud, beaming, and humble parents of 5 adult children. We're empty nesters. So our kids are 24 to 33. A couple of them are married with kids. So we've got 7 glorious grandbabies. You know how that is. Like,
woohoo.
Yeah, the grandbabies are just incredible. And that family keeps us, of course, busy, as you would imagine, with a total of 18 of us. We have a couple that live, south of us, so we go see them, and we have other kids that live farther away. And so we find ourselves kind of doing the rotation of getting them home or getting to them and just enjoying that precious time together. They're all quite adventurous and outdoor-esque and athletic. And so it's a good challenge for me at almost age 61 to keep up with what's been one of my first loves in my life, outside of family and God, and that is health. I've been a health and wellness guru now for almost 30 years. And it began with just some self-interest, some needs in my own home and some observations that I was making. I'm a curious person. I love to learn. And I'm also a natural teacher. I can't kind of help myself, but, I learned this and then share it, right? So that put me into an immediate position of influence way back in the day. In fact, kind of funny story. My first nickname in this realm of health and wellness was actually Dr. Ovary.
Oh,
So
wow.
you're like, wait, why? So what was happening is best friend's sister, my sister-in-law, we were all kind of pregnant at the same time. And really, what's kind of a fun theme for life and maybe a through line even for our conversation is being a chapter ahead. And because it was my second kid, when they were all pregnant with their first, I had already read What to Expect and When You're Expecting One. So I was on round 2 and just had a little bit of that motherhood mojo under my belt, and I was kind of getting into health stuff at the same time. And so they were really the beautiful people in my life that I cut my teeth on when I started doing health coaching. And shall we say, I've never looked back, made some dynamic shifts in how we raised our kids because our oldest had something as simple as chronic ear infections. And I just knew as a mom, there had to be a better way. And wow, much to my surprise, a better way I found, and we have lived ever since. So we're not only diehard who we are, what we do, but I have had a glorious lifetime experience of those 30 years of anything from owning my own wellness center to being a holistic health coach and sitting with clients and helping them with personal wellness protocols. I don't do that anymore. I retired from that a while ago. And then I kind of switched gears, kind of overlapped the two. And 15 years ago, I joined forces with a company known as doTERRA International, and I've been one of their top leaders, content creators, trainers, essential oil experts in that realm. And that has been a very rich experience in my life to be able to literally just get up every morning and dream about, like, set my sights on whose life can I change, and to just be on the Lord's errand and be led consistently and constantly in the direction of doing good and building the kingdom of God here on earth. And, I just had so much experience as a practitioner. I literally sat with, I think at last count, it was about 15,000 clients that I saw during the time of my practice. And so
Wow.
I wasn't just a health coach, I was a life coach because the protocol program that I developed included everything from spiritual, emotional, nutritional, you name it, kinds of health. And so I had the opportunity to really dive into people's lives holistically. And probably one of my favorite things about all of that is as a learner who's curious and one who's just built to solve problems. And because I'm a natural student every day of my life, whatever I was reading the day or the days before, be it my scriptures, be it some self development book or health book, you name it, the content was always there and ready so that I could be that teacher, I could be that mentor, that coach, and provide wisdom for the people that were in front of me. And probably one of my favorite quotes ever is I always know when I'm speaking by the Spirit because I learn from what I say. And
I know,
so
yeah, I know what you
I have
mean.
just been I have been the student of the Spirit, and I don't know what I would do without the Holy Ghost in my life because pretty much every minute of every day, I really count on those nudges and those ideas and those answers. I live questions. The breadcrumb trail gets dropped and I follow. So there's a little bit about me.
I love it. I love it. And besides being friends, I have known you as exactly what you described. You're in the doTERRA world, you're in the health world, you're highly sought after, and you interact with lots and lots of people and help lots and lots of people. And so I remember that when I came to your house, which you graciously opened to us for my husband to have his book signing because we needed a space that big and you were so gracious. But I remember as we started a conversation, as I was sharing with you that I was going to start this podcast and what the reason was, that it was to help people who were struggling. I remember being surprised that you immediately jumped on board and you knew exactly what that was about. And you had lots to say about it. And I remember being surprised by that because you're obviously very well rounded, but help me understand why you were knowledgeable about that. I mean, you knew so much immediately. You had so much to say. And why is that? What's your experience that you were versed on that?
Your podcast is called Just Love Them.
Mm-hmm.
You certainly set the premise for me that this is about, in my language, I all the time say meet people where they are. The number one thing to do as a parent, a teacher, a mentor, a health coach, you name it, is you can't require people to be where you are to actually make a difference in their lives. You've got to figure out how to meet them where they are and be present with them and to understand and respect and appreciate and at times have compassion for why people are where they are. And, I could run amok here and just go a million miles and just say all the reasons, but it's something I'm very well practiced at. The bottom line is I've done it more times than I can count with tens of thousands of lives, including myself, right? We all get to meet ourselves where we are and we get to
Mm-hmm.
just love ourselves where we are, not to mention our close family. And, I've been in family situations, especially in the in-law side. My husband has a very large family. And I've had opportunities even to do, I don't know that we want to call it coaching because it sounds a little professional or professional relationship, but I just am a natural coach. I'm a natural influencer. Like I was born to, this is kind of my thing is when we're together, whatever we interact about, my goal is that neither of us can leave that conversation anything but different, that we will be changed, that every interaction that I'm ever in will always exude value. And that's not just me showing up thinking I'm all that in a slice of whatever, and I'm going to like change your life. It's that coming together, we will be better people because we came together, that there's value that we both have to offer. And so I'm very well versed in simply meeting people where they are, loving them where they are, loving myself where I am. Because again, I don't esteem myself as being in some better position than
Right.
people that I'm talking with, and just so often appreciate. I don't know if you've ever spoken on your podcast about the Gallup Strengths Finder.
I have not yet.
Yeah.
No.
So, Jerry and I are way into that. And one of my strengths in my top 10 is what Gallup calls individualization. And so I'm wired to spot people's uniqueness to love it, edify it, work with it, fall in love with it, and to activate it. That's really some of my ninja skills that I would say are nothing short of God-given. It's just my job to use them properly.
Love that. I love that. I think that because you have helped so many people and you're so good at the individualization, because I have seen you in action many times and it really is a ninja skill for you. How would you counsel people who, when they're in the middle of it with family members or people that are close to them, which is different than people that you don't know that well because you're not wrapped up in their decisions, right? Their decisions don't affect your life. But people that are very close to you, that you might be wrapped up in their decisions, you might have your heartstrings tied to theirs. How have you navigated that?
Really good question, and probably so important and apropos for your format here because, yeah, it's easy to be a coach, a mentor, a whatever, a teacher of people for whom once the conversation's over, you part ways, and what happens with their life per se is not going to have an effect of your own, although I'm very connected to outcomes, right? I'm a very outcome-based person, and so I very much care.
Mhm.
So I don't do anything without the intention of something changing for the better. So that would always be my hope and my intention. And I think I feel very, very deeply. And at the same time, empathy is one of my lowest strengths, which is sort of an irony. In fact, I said to one of Gallup's top 10 employees, like, wait a minute, I'm really good at reading people. What do you mean empathy is super low for me? And he said, Laura, you read people where people are and you read where they can be. You're not so much reading their feelings. And I'm like, oh yeah, that explains
Oh,
it.
that makes
Okay.
sense. Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. So, one thing to understand is to where would that take me in answering your question is number one, understand how you operate. I hope that's something that I can model for people is that we don't all operate the same. So the person that's on the other side of whatever conversation you're having isn't necessarily wired the way you are. And I can give a couple examples of that I think are vitally important. And so I'm wired to influence you, to activate you, to get out of a problem and move forward. Well, if you've got someone that wants empathy and they want you to sit in their pity party with them and they want you to bathe in their feelings, I'm not going to be your best person for that. I'm really because I'm
Yeah.
not that interested in your feelings. The feelings to me they're feelings. They're great. You can feel feelings to me are optional. You can feel half empty or half full about whatever's going on. And I choose half full. Not always. I've got my moments of whining and complaining like anybody else. But, we all choose. Like, I'm well aware that any given situation, I can get on one side or the other. I mean, either God loves me and left me in this mess, or, oh, I'm a victim and blah.
Right.
So I don't like to get caught up in your decision on how you want to feel about it. What I want to get involved in is to link arms on, well, I'm going to assume you don't want to stay here, so let's do something about it, shall we? So if I was to put that into the strengths perspective and then help us understand why relationship dynamics aren't always graceful, is Gallup classifies these what they call strengths. They're called talent themes, and they're only your strengths if you make them such. And some of them can operate in what we call your balcony, which is where they're shining bright. And other times they can operate in their basement. Like one of my top 4 strengths is command. Well, you can imagine command in its basement can get really bossy. And I
Yeah.
do have the capacity to be bossy. I was known for that as the big sister. I don't feel like people call me bossy anymore. I feel like they call me commanding,
Yeah.
right? That really honed that skill. And command is to actually bring emotional clarity. So if you're in a situation with me and it's going off the rails and I can see it's not being led well, let's just talk about a women's class at church, okay? Something that simple. And the teacher is running amok or taking the audience down a rabbit hole of her story that isn't really appropriate for the so-called lesson, or she's kind of off the mark. I'm generally the good student who read her homework before class. And so I'm tracking with what's going on. And I'm going to have my arm go up and I'm going to offer some sort of insight or input or a question or a story, something that will not in any way shame the teacher or put her in an awkward position, but offer a new position. Okay. So that's an example. I'm an influencer. My first way of operating is to influence, and I'm always influencing any situation to move forward. Other areas of emphasis, because Gallup has classified all these talent themes that can be your strengths into 4 areas of operation. So one is influencing, another is executing, where you just want to get stuff done. And typically you want to get stuff done with the right people. So if you have a doer in your midst, they might be impatient with too much strategy talking, too much emotional talking. They don't really want to connect. They want to get stuff done. And so if it gets all whatever, they're just getting impatient.
Yeah.
And they're looking for a to do. Then you have people who are strategic. So one of the 4 domains is strategic thinking. They want to plan or process or prepare or think about it, create, learn, gather information, maybe before they run with something. So they may have a step that they put in front of an executing step. And so those people might clash or they might get along depending on how they respect each other's way of operating. And then finally, you have your relationship building type of people where connecting is what they do. Connecting with the right people is what they're driven to. So I'll use myself as an example. Put me in a parent situation. And so I'm influencing first. Let's go. Let's move forward here, shall we? Number 2, I'm strategic thinking. I'm learning, I'm processing, I take in information, I'm churning it around. I'm going to come out with a strategy. Number 3, I'm executing. I get stuff done. And number 4, I'm relationship building. Now you could believe, well, she must not be a people person. And nothing could be farther from the truth.
That is true. You are definitely a people person.
So what you're learning about me is, wow, she puts in a lot of preparation before she actually goes into a moment of connection. And the answer is, you better believe it. So now can you see why my goal is that when we get together, it's going to be good. I came prepared. I don't care where I am or what I'm doing. There's a scripture that talks about going out without purse or script because you've treasured up truths in your heart. I am every day treasuring truths in my heart so I can at any moment without purse or script be Johnny on the spot, ready to have an incredible interaction. And again, I'm counting on the Holy Ghost. I come prepared for every single life situation that I'm in, no matter what. And the more you do it, the more it just mounts into, I'm always prepared for just about anything. Until I'm not, of course, because I'm not an expert at everything, but I'm prepared for whatever I've found value in my life. So empathy for me, it actually kind of takes away from the value I can bring. So for me to sit and listen for a long time about you tell your story and all the gory details and everything, I'm going to probably get impatient with that. I might ask some questions to move it along because my goal will be, well, surely you don't want to stay in this, right? Surely you want to move out of it, right? And of course, I'm going to want to discover that and again, meet the person where they are. But if I have a child who's got empathy really, really high and they're very invested in feelings and connecting at all costs is how they're wired, and mom's moving along too much, or mom feels like she's trying to coach me versus just love me for where I am, that can be a time of conflict. Now, don't think I'm not speaking from experience. So back in, let's see, I'd say it was about 2014. One of my daughters was talking to another, and one was lamenting that I wasn't very empathetic, that I didn't listen well to emotions. And the other daughter said, well, don't you know that mom's empathy is at 29 out of 34? That's just not who she is. And so it was funny to have the one who's now, okay, I understand how mom's wired, try to explain to the other one, well, mom's not wired that way. So you're expecting her to show up in a way that's not natural for her. Now that's great. But when you tell somebody who's in strife, look, I'm not wired to help you the way you want to be helped, that doesn't go over well.
No.
That's been 10 years. And that child to this day is still best met in her mire, that there's something about wallowing in it that works for her. Okay. It's how she operates. So I have never forgotten that moment that she would like me to be empathetic. Now, I could dive deep down this channel, but if I could be short and say that empathy can have a basement and it can have a balcony. And in a balcony, it's compassion. And the difference is if you're going to get engaged and triggered and in the story and join them in the mire and join them in the blame game or join them in the victim game and all that, you become an enabler.
Yes.
You're not an empowerer.
Yes.
And so when you take your empathy and you take it up to your prefrontal cortex, which is your highest form of thinking, and it's where Christ-like behavior and charity actually live in the brain. They don't live in lower thought processes. They live in the prefrontal cortex. When you raise empathy, then it's called compassion. And so let's be Brene Brown for a minute. I think it's her that says this quote, clarity is kindness. So compassion can also be very direct statements. So again, let's go back to the command strength that I have. I'm in a situation where it's off the rails and I have the guts to say something honest. And I'm super known for that. I'm known for being direct, right? I'm known for not mincing words. I'm known for telling the truth. But I think for the most part, unless people have chosen offense, the feedback that I get is people know that I love them enough to tell them the truth.
Yes.
Now, when it's my kids, again, I'm very, very careful to not come across as the coach, right? To be the mom and what's different about that. And so recognizing that we all wear different hats, we have different identities and different roles we play. And I need to be very, very clear in a moment, what role am I playing? So is it tempting to parent a grandchild if they're running amok? And the answer is absolutely, right?
Right.
But not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, my husband and I, our daughter was here with some kids, and there was a grandkid running amok, and we would have handled it different, and we sort of got a little bit more involved in that sense than was appropriate. And our daughter just said, "Hey, I'm the parent here, and maybe we could keep it there." And just apologized to her. It was good. It was a very friendly, healthy exchange because that's how we like to roll.
Yeah.
Just like reminding us, I'm the parent. And even though you may not agree with how I'm handling a situation, let's make sure we let that authority, not that was her language, this is my language. Let's make sure we let that authority stay where it needs to be so she doesn't lose her ground with that kid. And then maybe privately we could engage with her, not in front of the child.
Yeah.
We were actually defending the other grandchild. We thought that one was getting in trouble inappropriately for the other. So we just got involved in like protecting the victim. It's just one of the where we all get involved. So again, to answer your question, is number one, you have to recognize that we each have individual ways we operate naturally without thinking. And if you're not conscious of that, you can be a wrecking ball. You really can.
Yeah.
Because you have to know how to meet the other person where they are and recognize how they operate. So am I talking to somebody that's a relationship building person first, and they want to connect at all costs? So connecting is the first goal. So I catch myself doing this all the time. I text all day long, right? I've got like 1 million people that I'm working with all day long. I have a staff, I have a family, I have leaders and builders and people that are like my business partners and those that are in like teams and like all different tiers of relationships all day long.
Yes.
And so I'm moving fast and I'm trying to get stuff done. I'm trying to answer questions and I'll draft a text or I'll text a text. And so often I'll stop myself before I send it and then front end it with, "Hi, how are you? How are you doing?" Right? Because
Yes.
I'm just like meeting them where they met me, like, "Hey, answer this question for me." Great, here's your answer. But I'll often have to consciously remind myself, how do they feel? I'm always thinking about how they feel when we interact, recognizing that those feelings are a huge part of our collaboration. And if they feel yucky, well, then our collaboration will fail. If they feel good and safe and loved and cared about, and not to say that they aren't, and I'm just pretending that, oh, I already am assuming that. That's the difference is I'm assuming that already. I'm assuming that of just about anybody. Like we're friends, right? We're family, right? We love each other, right? We want to be honest with each other, right? We want to make some good things happen together, right? Like I'm just assuming that's already the case, but that isn't always the case about where that other person is. So one, recognizing how we're each operating and how we don't operate the same. Way back in our marriage, gosh, when did our first child was born in 1990. And I think this is before he was born. So back in like 1989, we were reading The Color Code by Taylor Hartman.
Oh, yes.
Finding out that I'm a red and Jerry's a white and, oh, we don't operate the same. And that was not only liberating, but probably a critical change in our marriage because Jerry and I are quite opposite in a number of ways.
Mhm.
So appreciating that we don't do life the same has been vital for us to thrive in our relationship.
Yeah. And that was the very first personality book that Kim and I ever read as well. And I remember being so shocked, like, oh, everybody doesn't think the same way I do. Like, isn't this just the way it is? How can somebody think differently? I remember that was so eye-opening for me.
Yes. So I think that's been one with individualization being a top strength for me. Is just when I say meet people where they are, I mean meet them, be conscious about that. Be conscious about how you're operating. Be conscious about how they operate. And it really helps me pull out of biases. And I really work to not make it about me. Like I'm just not one of those parents like, oh, you look bad on my scoreboard of parenting or life. Like, no, 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 none of that, right? No scorekeeping or you're my badge. Like relationships are not transactional for me, not at all. My kids are, we're an eternal bundle. And that progression is collective. It is not individual. And so I see us as we're on the ship together. We're going to the promised land together. And if somebody fell off, like, let's get a lifesaver out there. What do we got to do to keep us all like we're only going there together? And so there is no me, there's only we. And yet there's a bunch of me's on the boat, right? And just figuring out how to navigate that has been, it's a true art form. And so conscious awareness for me is a critical step number one. Absolutely imperative is you have to be aware. You have to be aware of each person as an individual so that you can meet them where you are or where they are, but know where you are. Like if you're feeling really wounded or hurt or unsafe, how can you bring the best version of yourself to a conversation so you can show up and participate in an interaction in a way that's healthy?
Yeah. And I love that you bring up this idea of understanding yourself, how you are, and understanding them, how they are, because that is the best way to meet them where they're at, is when you can understand how you are and when you can understand how they are. I'm sure that when you took those Strength Finders tests for yourself, it was amazing, but I'm sure that when you took it or when you had your children take it, that's when the real ahas started to happen. I'm guessing, is that right?
Oh, yeah. Not only have our kids taken it, not only have I mean, most everybody that I interact with on a regular basis has taken the strengths test. So I can either ask them their strengths or I already have and I have a decent memory and I
Mhm.
remember. So if somebody's kind of going on long, for example, I might recall, oh, that person has communication in their top five and they tend to talk more. So, how can I set new parameters for an interaction, for example, to where we can find each other in a way that the communication we're having is successful for both of us? Like, if I'm going to schedule a call with someone and I know they tend to talk too long, how can I set expectations differently so that our conversation stays healthy for both of us, for example? I've learned that I really love strategic thinkers. They just feed me. People who have really healthy strategy, who have strategy really, really high,
Mhm.
like feed my soul. I like hearing strategy. And I love interacting with other learners. Like we're just curious and, forever learners together. I've learned that people who are really, really high in belief, and I have it in my top 10, so I appreciate that. People who are very high in belief can also feel very stubborn to me and like non-learners, and that they dig their heels in and whatever they believe, and there's no moving them on that. And so I tend to defer. I also have learned what my conflict sequence is how do I deal with conflict? And how does my husband deal with conflict? So we've gone through other trainings to help us understand our conflict sequence and also understand that we don't do that the same either. And just dynamics of relationships. So the more enlightenment I've been able to gather in that regard of just human actions, interactions, dynamics, and how we respond to one another, and to be mindful of that so that if it's going off, how can I show up in a way that brings it back together? And, even some people have competition and you feel this sense of like, what is this energy I feel between us? Like we're competing for something, and then just recognizing, okay, how do I work with that instead of against it? So being conscious, aware, and responding as a result of it is for me a critical aspect of life. and all relationships, not to mention those that need to be carefully met where they are.
Yeah. I love that. And there's so much out there too about how to understand yourself, how to understand other people. There are tons of books and tons of personality tests, and we're not necessarily advocating on this program for Strengths Finders, but having both delved into Strength Finders quite a bit, it is very comprehensive and very helpful. But there's so much out there. And so for our listeners, just finding the right thing for you to learn about yourself, how you are, how you respond, what's important to you. And then also for those people who are important in your world, if you can understand them, that is just, it's huge. I know that when I had my children, they haven't all taken Strength Finders, but they have done other things for me. One of the simplest ones is the 5 love languages, which that one is super eye-opening too,
Brilliant.
and a
Yes.
very simple test to take. And it just helps so much when you can just understand the other person a little better.
Well, and that, Stephen Covey, right? Seek to understand before you seek to be understood.
Yes.
Could not be a better capstone for everything that we've just talked about. And
Mhm.
by the way, Jerry and I did Strength Finders, I think 9 years prior. So the last time we really got into it and have never left that becoming a language for us was in 2016. But do the math, 9 years before that, we had done it as well, but we didn't dive in and learn about it. So sure, we took the test and we kind of had a vague knowing, but without really diving in and learning it, it wasn't very useful. And so
Right.
that's been the biggest difference is we're in a world where a bunch of people have dived in and it's literally become a second language for a good portion of our community. And that's been very useful, very
Mhm.
useful.
It really is. I totally agree with you. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we conclude?
I did feel to share one other thing, something very special to me. I really appreciate that sometimes ourselves at different stages of our life and those we love might make choices that feel like somebody jumped the ship, right?
Yeah.
They're no longer going to the promised land. And the thought of that can be devastating. And for some people, it's a level of sadness that's immeasurable. And for other people, it's a sense of loss of control. So we can have anything from deep tears to expanded anger or whatever it is, depending on how a person deals with conflict, right? We all deal with conflict differently. So I'm a real scripture reader. Like reading my scriptures every day is a lifeline for me. The Holy Ghost and the scriptures, you know, just this is what I live. This is my juice. And so I'm always studying patterns, right? And I really appreciate that we're just in other people's messy lives, hello, Jacob with 12 kids and a bunch of wives and all kinds of craziness, right? So we're in their strife and their struggles and we're seeing how they're handling it. We're seeing how God handles their troubles. And I just am really appreciate patterns. Patterns to me, learning God's patterns has really taught me how to handle situations, is to really understand, well, how would God handle it? Therefore, how can I? And so just really learning the greater patterns and models of God's way has been huge for me. And one of my favorite stories that I'd just love to highlight is Abraham. In the Bible, we read the story of Abraham and he's being schooled by God. And he basically gets taken for an astrology lesson. So this is in the Old Testament. And he's being schooled about how the earth is lower than the moon, which is lower than the sun, right?
Yeah.
There's these tiers of light, or we could call them orbits, and that there's different orbits, that planets or spheres are at different levels of orbit. And is this about planets? Is that what he's learning? No, this is about people, and that eternal progression is about changing orbits. And so although someone in our life might be in an orbit that again is either devastating or inflaming to us, however we choose to respond to it, or however we choose to be triggered by it. And that I found tremendous solace and comfort and understanding that progression is eternal. And it's not just in this little window of time here in this thing called Earth life. We stood in line, we went to Disneyland. This is a long time ago with the family. We were at California Adventure. We were standing in line for California Soarin', that crazy roller coaster there, right? Stand in line for hours, right, for this one, 50-second ride or however long it lasts, way too short. And I remember standing there and saying to my kids, this is just like life. Like we're standing in premortal life, just in line for hours, waiting for our turn on earth. And then we go and it's up and down and it's exhilarating and you're dropping your stomach and it's scary and then it's over. And yet it's not over. And so even though this life is this little blip, this little ride in between the one side and the other, and it is such a significant one, I get that, right? It's an opportunity to quote unquote prove ourselves. It's a proving ground. I take tremendous solace in understanding that my call is to meet a person wherever they are in their orbit and to honor that and to honor what got them there and what pains or deceptions or hurts or troubles or whatever have them there, and to really appreciate that and to find a way to honor and love them or exactly where they are, and to find so many things to celebrate, to find out what's right about them. You know, we have a family habit of watching American Idol. We've been doing it for forever. And I won't say that I'm like an avid fan, but we went to Texas with our daughter and we were watching just this last Monday and Tuesday's episodes. And there's a guy in there, his name is Jelly Roll. Now, I didn't have a clue who he was. And then at first glance, the guy had tattoos all over his face. So imagine my first response was, oh, you know, a guy like, whoa. And he's a very big guy and he looked kind of rough and tough, right? And immediately our daughter, who we were visiting, said, oh my gosh, do you know about his story? And I said, no. And she started to tell me about his really, really, really shaded past and just what he'd been through and just craziness. And as he spoke to so there's 12 contestants per show, right? This is when there's 24. So the day before was one coach. He's the coach for the second 12. And every time he opened his mouth, he had such glorious, positive, honoring, individualized comments for each person. And he came from this experience of knowing what it's like to struggle.
Wow.
Knowing what it's like to go from the depths of despair and demise to being as famous and as successful as he is. And he hasn't forgotten his past. He's extremely humble. But it was so interesting to watch, you know, and I haven't been tracking this season, but my husband and my daughter have. And the performances that were coming out of his mentees were off the charts. And it was very obvious that he infused in them belief in themselves and belief in the possibility for the orbit path that they're on, knowing what was possible for them. And
Wow.
for me, that's where it's at, right? Like, how can I infuse love and possibilities? And how can I see in someone the glory that exists within them and reflect that back to them?
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Laura. So beautiful. Listeners, I hope this has resonated with you the way it's resonated with me. And as you've listened to this podcast today, I'm guessing that you have thought about someone you know who could find some peace and some understanding by listening to what's been shared today. Please take a moment to share this podcast episode with them. And be sure to join me again next time for another episode of Just Love Them.